What are we talking about today, David?
We're talking about how video games might or might not cause violent behavior. Spoiler alert, it's a no. There's very, very
All right,
little
good.
evidence to back this
So
up.
we can like both agree that video games and even violent video games have little to no evidence that backs up that they cause violent behavior.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For example, in a poll started by CBS News, 80% of the school shooters or mass shooters showed very little interest in video games or didn't even know what video game, well, like violent video games like references were. They didn't play violent video games.
Um, in a study done by CNBC News, they found the video game revenue in 2018 and then violent gun deaths from 2017. And they actually found out that there is no correlation between video game revenue and violent gun deaths. So, like for example, in the country of China, per 100,000 people, there was 0.04 violent gun deaths, whereas video games made $37.95 million in China that year. The only outlier in this is the United States, which is pretty special because the United States has very loose gun laws, whereas other countries like China, Japan, South Korea, Germany, the United Kingdom have more strict gun laws, which prohibits people from having guns. And then another thing that like helps us out is like the American Psychological Association also reaffirms that violent video games do not cause violence among adolescents, and they have done many researches into figuring this problem out or this claim out. And the one thing that they do say is that they would like a reevaluation of the video game rating system, which I think is actually a great idea. What do you think on that, David?
Yeah. So a reevaluation of the video game rating system would be pretty useful due to the fact that like some of them are kind of like iffy, like on the edge. Like they shouldn't like the mature rating is pretty has a decent amount of like recommendations and stuff. It has like violence, sexual content, stuff like that that's included that goes into that section. But then again, there's the teen video game section, which also is violent and stuff. But the thing is, like anybody can buy those games, even like 9-year-olds, pretty much. So I feel like it should be more restrictive, not only in rating standpoints, like having more like definite ratings and stuff, but it should also have more restrictions from buying, like in stores and things along the lines of that.
Yeah. I was just gonna say I totally agree with that. If there was a better rating system, I think it would also just help parents to decide if this game is right for their child.
Yeah, it's that's a big part about why this is like pushed. It's because some of the parents don't really understand which games are like good for their kids and stuff, which ones would be like good to buy for their kids and things. And some people are like, well, it's mature, but like they played other mature games that aren't like destructive to like a whole bunch of stuff. Some mature games are like more like harsh than others. Some are like simple, just slight things, like little bit too much to be in the teen category or stuff like that. So like Destiny, for example, is kind of more tame than like Call of Duty or like GTA. More tame, but it's still rated mature. So an update to that could help parents decide.
I think an interesting thing like on the rating system is like that some games that you'd think would be considered mature are actually rated T. Like there could be some pretty violent games that you'd say are like rated T, blood, gore, all of that. That could be rated T, but they don't end up getting rated M, which is interesting.
Yeah,
And I think if there was a reevaluation on the rating system, it would help parents and everyone else a lot.
yeah, it'd be very, very useful to everybody. Another study by the APA, actually, by their branch called the PsychNet, was about the title of the article was "Competence Impeding Electronic Games and Players' Aggressive Feelings, Thoughts, and Behaviors" by PsychNet. This is a article about how most games actually don't really have a correlation to violent tendencies, but surprisingly, competence like impeding ones, like uh, games that like require a lot of strategy, skill, stuff like that, like online chess, Tetris, those types of games actually do
Also, like
cause
RPGs, like
yeah. Those games actually do kind of cause a little bit of like anger because you're like stressed and like you're stressing a lot, but they're not actually that bad and they're not considered a violent video game. Like take a look at Tetris. It's four cubes falling down, and you're trying to stack it. Do you really think that's a violent video game? No. And they're not really causing aggressive behavior toward other people. They're causing aggressive behavior because the game is frustrating, which makes sense. I mean, you want to be challenged. That's why you're playing Tetris or solving a Rubik's Cube. People that don't know how to solve it get really angry at it sometimes, and it's very similar in scope.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Just like touching on that is like the fact that like more like skill-based games like Tetris something like that can actually cause more violent tendencies in like something like a violent video game because like I guess that kind of makes sense where like you're playing Call of Duty that's just something where you're just kind of mindlessly just like doing tasks or whatever you're set to do in the game, whereas in like Tetris like you're failing the level or whatever over and over again. That could make you pretty mad. So I think where parents see these violent tendencies could actually be not from the violent video games but more from the skill-based video games. So like say your kid is playing Tetris or whatever, they get angry and they throw a controller or something at the wall, well, then they go on and play Call of Duty because that would be like, I guess in a way less stressful because there's not as many skill based objects you have to do. It's just more of like, oh, okay, I'll just go and do this. Then I think that's where parents have a disconnect.
Yeah, I don't think some parents understand that when we get mad, we're not actually like getting mad. We're kind of like getting angry either at ourselves or at a video game, but we're not like gonna carry that elsewhere unless, for example, it typically happens more in younger children that they'll carry it elsewhere, but most of the time in older teenagers and like 13 to 18, they mostly won't carry it out. They'll just get mad at the video game and they'll maybe switch to another video game or getting mad sometimes is actually part of the fun. I enjoy like raging at video games because that's the reason I play. For example, rage games like getting over it. That's the reason you play them is to get mad, and and then you get stressed and stuff, and it's really fun. You like enjoy it, and then you go afterward. You like feel really accomplished when you like get farther because it's super hard to get far. That's it gives you a boost of like confidence. It's really fun.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think one of the most interesting things about this is that like this push to like ban violent video games or something is not really anything new. Back in like 1993, there were like congressional hearings in like 1993. That's almost been like 30 years that we've been hearing this. There were congressional hearings over the game Mortal Kombat. And so like Mortal Kombat had just released in 1992 and it was mostly contained to like arcade cabinets and stuff so like parents could like more better monitor their children like keep their child away from playing that. But eventually, with Sega and Nintendo starting a what they call a console war, which is where Sega's Master System and Nintendo's Nintendo Entertainment System were like competing head to head with each other. They were making more games that appealed to more demographics, and so uh, Mortal Kombat was ported to these new systems, and so that's allowed children, younger children, to be allowed more access to these games because they could just play it at home. Well, parents were getting worried about this, and so there was finally a push for a congressional hearing to decide if a new rating system should be put into place. And that's where the new rating system that is still currently around is today. And I think that also goes to show like that rating system set in 1993 is still around today. I think there should be an update to that rating system because obviously games have evolved from Mortal Kombat, which was like a 16-bit based game, to we have like almost real life looking games nowadays.
Yeah. So like I feel like the older standards are like old, you know. It's for lack of better phrasing, but we could just kind of make new standards. Like the old standards were kind of simple, like violent video games, violent tendencies were simpler. But for the rating system, they basically were like, okay, so a couple things, like 20 things, make it mature. 15 things make it teen. If you have to match a certain number of these amount, 4 or 5, to get from teen to mature. But you can have mature content in teen as long as you only match a few. For example, some violent, as Carson already said, some violent video games are actually only small amount of violent, and they're mature because they have other content that's considered mature. And then there's the teen video games that are considered teen video games, but they're like extremely, extremely violent, but aren't don't have some of the other qualities that make them mature. So I feel like a reevaluation of the rating system should be.
Yeah, 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 for sure. And so like again with like Mortal Kombat was like in 2000, Grand Theft Auto 3 was released, and parents had similar reactions as they did in 1993 with Mortal Kombat. GTA 3 was the first game to have like a protagonist in an open world where they could basically do anything they wanted. Like for example, the protagonist could rip NPCs or non-playable characters from vehicles and steal their vehicles, or they could go around and they could just grab guns and like shoot whoever they wanted. This caused parents to worry that this would influence their children, but again, there's really no evidence that backs that this claim is true. It's more of like if your child would go out and play a war game. Like if your child would just go out in the front yard and play war games with their friends, parents would not care, but again, that child is using its imagination to conjure up this war game. Well, the same thing's going on in Grand Theft Auto 3 here. The child's using their imagination to play this game. And there was another controversy in 2009 with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2's No Russian mission in their campaign. No Russian was basically a mission where you're an undercover agent for a group of radical Russians who go into an airport and start like raiding this airport and like shooting all the people in this airport. Well, this caused a lot of concerns from parents, like should this be in my child's video game? And again, I feel like that all comes down to like the discretion of the parents, and the parents have using their common sense and be like, is my child old enough to play this game? Are they mature enough to be able to take in this content? And I feel like if there was a more defined rating system, then parents would have a better grasp on being able to figure that out.
Most definitely. So, also, a lot of people don't. They're like looking at through scopes. Like they're not taking in the broad range of evidence. For example, there's a lot of articles on Facebook where a lot of some parents get their information, get a decent amount of their information. Some of them are how violent video games just cause violent tendencies because people don't always look at the entire scope. Some of these articles actually most were not actually written by people in the scientific community that did the research, blah blah blah. And they're not actually validated by any of the credible sources that they're quoting. Some of the quotes could also be taken out of context. They're also mostly written by people that just have strong opinions and not really certified to talk about the statements that they're talking about, and they don't really back it up with
Exactly.
facts from people using ethos or and they just kind of don't really use logic either.
Exactly. Without that basis of their evidence, it's more opinions at that point. They're just making opinions and unjustified opinions at that of what their child is doing. And it just kind of leads to more uncertainty about how video games should be rated and if your child should be playing that game or not. And so, in the end, I believe, and David, what do you believe? But I believe that it falls down to the responsibility of the parent to decide if their child is mature enough to play these video games.
I would have to agree with you there because even though the rating system's like out of date, blah blah blah, I think the parent should really at least look at the video game. Like probably since we have so much technology nowadays, you can just look it up on YouTube. So, for example, if you want to see if GTA is good enough for your kid, you can look it up on YouTube. Watch a couple videos on how violent it is, how like all the different categories for mature, and see if your kid would benefit from having it or play it and enjoy playing it. And you wouldn't think it would cause any violent tendencies out of it. It would help you and your child
Exactly,
grow
yes.
to be good because some children want to play certain video games and it's understandable.